that what?
For sound, it should be okay, right?
I'm thinking it should be okay. Breathe, just breathe. Okay, so we were going with the Bali flow. We had to take a brief intermission because the battery had died. But you know, that's the way things go. So we're back with you. And I had just asked Jodi for some ideas that she could pass on to you on how to get to that self-love point without having to jaunt off to Bali.
Or just jaunt off to Bali.
Well, you know, that is another option. And I think a lot of people are going to want to do that. And okay, so I want to add my own tip before I even get to hers. I would say that if you are here and you can't do that, I would say drive in a convertible. Because just having the wind in your hair and driving is fantastic.
You know, this car a year ago was like a therapy car. Because literally I would be at work and there were times where I just needed to leave and to think, what is that?
The peace sign. Okay, go ahead. I'm Sheila with the Grateful Goddess, and with me today is Goddess Jodi Puhalla. Some of you may recognize her because several years ago she was a Goddess of the Month. Once before, when she was working at Reach and Dress for Success, an organization that really helps women with fresh starts and new beginnings. And then lo and behold, it was a time after all that giving from caretaker to all these different things that she was in the need of being in the place of receiving.
I had a full-time job and I was the director of this place, and then after a year of going through a divorce, I was just fried.
Yes.
And I knew that I liked my job, I liked my community, but I knew if I stayed, it just wasn't the place for me. Mm-hmm. So after a suggestion of a friend, she said, it just sounds like you need to get away. Mm-hmm. And so I did. I actually went across the planet. And I was going to do a Southeast Asia backpacking trip, but she said, you know, I've heard Bali is a very healing place. And I just said, okay, fine, I'll go to Bali.
Yes.
And then my life is definitely different after going to Bali. And I just got back for my third time back.
Yes. So you went in Bali in search of what?
Well, I was such a hot mess. I was just in search of clearing all this clutter that I had developed over the years. I was married 25 years. My kids were then grown and out of the house. And I really didn't know. I got a one-way ticket, and all I asked was that I understand how I can heal and how I can grow.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what were some of the significant learnings from the first trip?
The first trip was really about, I mean, physically, emotionally, spiritually, I could be defined as just burnt out.
Yes.
So it was sort of just coming undone even more and going into that very, very dark place. Mm-hmm. After I left, I spent a month in India and then 4 months in Bali. I did feel quite different, but I knew that there was still a lot more healing that would be taking place.
Mm-hmm. So you felt different in what way?
I looked different. My daughter saw me after 4 months. She came to Bali and joined me, and she just said, you know, you look lighter. You not just physically weighing lighter, but the light was able to shine more.
What's the freedom piece to all of this?
Yeah, I mean, many people don't afford themselves the freedom out of fear. Mm-hmm. And fear was one thing that I really didn't have when it came to going there. It was scarier to stay in the place that I was.
Yes.
And so to me, it wasn't a real act of courage. To others, they just say, oh, I would never be okay with doing that. And so with freedom, there really can't be fear. And you cannot be afraid of how others will see you. I had to let go of that. I was from a very small town, and I'm sure some people thought I was crazy. and I just didn't care at that point at all. So freedom, it's also understanding that you can't read a book or really even listen to anyone else on how to be you, you really have to go inward and learn to get those messages from somewhere else or from your higher self. And so that means stripping away a lot of this exterior stuff. Mm-hmm. And once I did that, I spent a lot of time by myself in Bali, but I also met some beautiful people in Bali that really helped me along. And that's freedom, is really trusting yourself and trusting the next direction.
Mm-hmm. So for people who feel as though they don't have the freedom, are there any tips that you, I know that to me, one of the ways that you started on your freedom thing is just having a convertible so that you just have that sense of freedom when you're driving. And I know we've talked about that before in terms of when you were feeling really heavy, a lot of pressure, you would go for drives.
I did, and I've noticed that I haven't needed the top down and driving as much as I used to. And it was, my life was so structured. And even American life, you don't really realize until you leave it and you live somewhere else in another country that we are very much into structure. And we're very much into material objects and things that we think we need. Even time. In Bali, there's more of a flow. Yeah. There's just a flow to it. And people are typically late. And I just learned that that's okay. They just float in when it's their time. And even taking that pace and slowing down is just really a beautiful thing. Mm-hmm. Here it's more difficult. Here you're just called rude. And so there isn't freedom if you're feeling like you have to go somewhere. And what I've noticed too is when I return, people say, oh, I want to get together with you. And sometimes it's tricky because I've noticed a lot of people, their lives are filled with things that they don't really like doing. A lot of people don't like their jobs, or they got to see that sister-in-law they don't really like, and they have to do this and they have to do that. So it isn't that they don't want to see me or do something they love. It's that they have just structured their life
without freedom.
Without freedom. Yeah.
And it's available without having to go to Bali. It's just a matter of choosing how you spend your days so that it has more of a sense of freedom to choose.
And it means saying no sometimes, and it means doing things your own way that maybe people don't understand. And I have become a master of that because I don't know, some people just don't understand me. But I will say I have gotten a lot of encouragement too, because again, I think it's people want to feel more free, but they just don't have the courage. I learned to just really respect that and to not do things myself not in keeping with where I wanted to be. For us here, that just sounds so terribly rude. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a balance that you can have too, but I really am much more cognizant of people that I should be with, places and things that I should be doing much more than before. My whole life was obligation, and I really didn't know who I was.
Yeah. Well, I think when we live in a state of what we should do, it never feels like a choice. It doesn't. Mm-hmm. It isn't freedom.
Right.
So, you're living somebody else's life. You're living the life that somebody else thinks you should live, rather than yours.
And there is a knowing sometimes. Like I didn't want to admit that to myself, and I enjoyed life. I always looked like I was enjoying life anyway. Yeah. and I, and I did, and I loved raising my kids and living that life. However, I definitely know that I didn't explore like I'm exploring now. Mm-hmm. Just trying things. So to really just try and, let go of some things. That does mean letting go of some things that you really thought that you needed. Mm-hmm. And I don't watch the news. I don't watch TV much. And I found I just feel better. Mm-hmm. I would never have guessed that because I love the Real Housewives of Atlanta with every fiber of my being. But it was the story I told myself. I have also gotten much more honest with myself because I think I was really telling myself some things that weren't true. And that is maybe the toughest thing.
So how did you find your authenticity when because again, like you said, you sort of thought that you did, or that you were being happy, but it sounds like you were putting on a happy.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Remember, our interview was the day after my ex-husband left.
Yes.
And I had people see that interview and they went, "What? You look fine." And I just told someone, I was a very good actress. Yeah. What was so beautiful about going somewhere far away is that I was just Jodi the American. And people where they didn't know this story about me, they didn't know anything about me, and those stories really weren't important. They weren't who I was.
And I think that's what I was going to add to that, is that as long as you don't bring the story with you.
Right.
I mean, had you gone to Bali and had the need to tell everyone your story, you are recreating your past into your future, as opposed to just letting it go.
Yeah, and I was very cognizant of that. I did share my story, but only when it seemed important for that person or important for me, but because I was a hot mess, and at times I still am, it's not like I'm done with anything. I never will be, but I did really move through some very tough stuff. And I think I really expedited it by doing it this way, because I had to get very real with myself. This last trip, I still had some things in my heart that I could tell that needed to mend. And what I learned is, in any sort of pattern that you want to change, it takes a lot of intention and it takes focus, because people kind of want you to stay in the same pattern. And some would say even energies we can't even see want you to stay in the same pattern. And I saw that. But when I would focus, and I met some amazing people in Bali from all over the world who would be my partners in that. And so I would really work on changing a pattern. And then what I learned was, then you get tested. And that's where, it gets real. And I've noticed that just lately, where I would be faced with a decision, and it's like, oh, in the past I would have just gone in there because it's a good story, it's kind of fun, I like a little drama, I like a little adventure, I do, and that's okay, that's part of who I am. But now the drama and adventure can be much more healthy and beautiful. It doesn't have to be in a toxic way. And I just saw some of the decisions that I was making, like, why? And once the pattern's changed and you're tested and you pass the test, it is the best feeling, because it just sets like jello, it's like, and now it's just a part of you.
So were there techniques and any tips you can give in terms of how you did that?
Well, what really works for me is, when I went to India, I went to the Oneness University, and I really learned to pray. I really learned to worship and how to build a connection with my God. Yeah. And so I think first you have to be really clear and ask for what you want. Yes. Ask for that help or guidance. And so I always do that. And then living in Bali also taught me the importance of ritual. Ritual was just not a big part of my life in my upbringing and where I'm from. And it always kind of scared me a little. Like, I felt like I wasn't worthy enough to do certain rituals, or to, have things like altars. Oh, no. Now, ritual, things like, I've sent ashes into the ocean. It can be anything that you decide that would really help you symbolically move forth. I've just found that really is so important. Yeah. And I do a lot less talking, believe it or not, and I'm a talker, but a lot more listening. Listening to others, but also just listening to my God or my higher self. That I'm really curious about is, like I said, my kids had grown and were out of the house, so I had this clean slate, so to speak, to create a life. And I just wasn't sure what kind of life I wanted to create. Being a young mother, or being a mother, having been there, I'm not quite sure what the tips would be there, because I think that adds a whole other element. Yeah. But I do want to explore that, because I think this sense of, finding yourself, healing yourself. For women, it's the key to everything.
Well, I think the tip is still the same, though. I mean, in terms of looking at your schedule and what things are you doing because you should or have to, and what are the things that you can politely say no.
Yeah.
Because that's a big one. You need to free up space so that you have quiet time.
Really, women are actually very rewarded for being self-sacrificing, for putting everyone first. I mean, we are masters at it in this region. And I'm just here to say that I don't think it's doing anyone any good.
That's true.
Because until you realize how important you are and how special you are to this world, to yourself, to your God, you really can't serve anyone. You really can't. I mean, I know it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. When you honor yourself, you really listen to yourself.
Yeah.
You don't need all this information that's out there. You just need to listen and feel deeply.
Yeah.
And that has, then you feel free.
Yeah, yeah. Listening to your own inner wisdom. Thank
you,
dear.
I know the words to this song. So instead I sing now. Oh, I know the next part. Sun and the moon, all I wanna do is have some fun. I got a feeling I'm not the only one. All I wanna do is have some fun.